Hi, my name is Annie and welcome to the Ultimate Guide Group. I'm in the process of buying my second property and I've decided to share my journey with you. I'll be sharing my journey via knowledge bites, Instagram posts, blogs and Insta stories to help you with your buying process too, so stay tuned. So what are some of the key things you should be looking out for when you're buying a property? Well, the first thing you need to decide is whether you want to buy a house or a flat. And also when you're buying a flat, if you choose to go with a flat, whether you want a flat that has a share of freehold or a leasehold flat. Now, what's the difference between a freehold, share of freehold and a leasehold? Well, a freehold means that you own the land underneath your property. So if that house were to get knocked over, you still own the land, the soil underneath your property, as well as the building. When you own a leasehold for either a house or a flat, you essentially don't own the ground that your property is on, but you own the building on top of it or the flat that you reside in. And for a share of freehold, for example, if a house were to be separated into two flats and you have a share of freehold, it means you own part of the land that the property resides on. So you have part of the say on what happens with that land as well and part of the responsibility. Now, what are some of the differences between a leasehold and a freehold? Well, firstly, with a freehold, you are fully responsible for all the boundaries of your property. That includes maintenance of the property. So, for example, gardening, windows, fences, making sure that your property essentially looks and is upkept well. Whereas with a leasehold, you would pay a monthly service charge and ground rent. So the ground rent is you renting the ground that the property is on, and the service charge is for the general maintenance of communal spaces in your building. So this will include maintaining the front, outside and roof and any communal spaces outside of the property you pay your monthly service charge for. So once you've decided whether you want a freehold or a leasehold property or share a freehold property, the next thing to do is to start looking at properties themselves. So how do you do this? Well, I personally went on Zoopla and Rightmove. I always recommend you use at least 2 apps. Don't assume that all properties will be available on both or all apps. There are other options such as prime location, on the market, and going to direct vendors as well. Now that you've decided whether you're buying a leasehold or a freehold property, what are some of the key things that you should be looking out for when you go to view your properties? Well, obviously, make sure you check that the property is aesthetically pleasing to you. So making sure that you like the general interior, you can see potential in the general interior. Checking for things like, does it have a downstairs bathroom or toilet if you're buying a house, where the location of the toilet, bathroom and kitchen are, checking the number of rooms. Those are definitely important. When you go and view your house, step outside and take a good step back and have a look at the quality of the roof that you're buying. Check how it looks in comparison to other houses in the area. Checking to make sure that you don't have the oldest roof in the house, because these can tend to cost you a lot of money should you have to repair it. Another thing to look out for is the quality of the windows of the house. I know this is something that no one ever thinks to look at when they go and view a house, but checking for things like if there is any steam in between the double glazing, that tends to indicate that you will need to replace the double glazing soon. Checking the sill around the double glazing, again, that would imply that you probably need to change the double glazing soon. And looking at things like the window ledges inside and outside of the house. Again, these will show you the wear and tear of the windows. You can also have a look to see if there's any cracks in the house, on the walls, so take a really close look at the walls and on the joins in the houses. This tends to indicate either A, that the house has not been painted or plastered recently, B, it's not been plastered well, or C, that there is some movement on the house that might make it difficult to get a mortgage for this property. Another thing to check out for is the quality or the age of the boiler. If you have a really old boiler, it tends to mean that it's more prone to breakdowns and might require replacement soon. And a final thing to check out for is the boundaries of the property. So when you buy a house, you don't just own the house, you own the boundaries, so the garden or any front land in front of the property. Making sure that you have a look to see what the quality of those lands are. If there's any trees that are underrooted that are growing through, that could be a really expensive cost to you later on. So what about if you're buying a flat? What are some of the key questions you should be asking? Well, the first thing to ask is how long the lease on the flat is, because this will tend to affect the value of the flat should you buy the flat. The next thing I would recommend you ask is checking how much the service charge and the ground rent for the property is, as these can be quite significantly pricey and will affect your affordability when applying for a mortgage. Another thing to ask with regards to service charge and ground rent is how often does this ground rent and service charge increase, or has it increased in the past, and by what percentage? The next thing I would ask you to check is things like the communal areas and asking who has access to these, whether it's open to the general public, whether it's open to just a specific floor or open to the entire building. Next, I would suggest you have a look at things like the ceilings in the flat, making sure that you're checking to see if there's any damps or any marks in the ceilings, because this could be indicative of a leak from a flat above, which could be a problem for you when you move in. Finally, I would recommend you ask who else lives in the building. For example, asking if it's mainly students, young professionals or families, and making a decision based on that as to whether or not you feel comfortable living in such an environment. So what are some of the things you should be asking for whether you're buying a flat or a house? Well, the first thing I would recommend is you take a walk around the area, have a look and see who lives in the local area, how well do they maintain their properties, be it a flat or a house, is there generally a lot of litter in front of people's houses, because this tends to be indicative of antisocial behaviour and higher crime rate in the area. Another thing I'd recommend you have a look at is seeing how far away the local train station is, if there's any buses that frequent the area and how many buses frequent the area, and also checking if there are any night buses, because that will make your life generally easier should you decide to travel out in the evening. Another thing to do is to go on your phone and check if Uber or Bolt is available in the area, because this gives you additional means of transport. Also, I would recommend you check for things such as parking, where you might not be driving or you might not require parking, you might have guests and you might need to know where they'll be able to park should they decide to come and visit you. So checking if there's any free parking local or any time restrictions on the parking would be really useful. And finally, I would say check the local crime rates. This will really impact you in terms of things like whether you should buy a ground floor flat, for example, because these tend to get broken into more, or whether you'd be able to park your car safely on the residential road. For more tips on things to check out for when viewing a house or a flat, please follow our Instagram at The Ultimate Guide Group. Thank you very much.